I never thought a single night could haunt me for the rest of my life. But here I am, years later, still replaying every detail like it just happened yesterday. That night with my mother, what I saw, what I heard, changed everything I believed about trust, love, and the people we think we know best. It was the kind of night you try to forget, but your mind refuses to let go. Every time I close my eyes, I'm back there again, standing in the hallway, my heart pounding, listening to the sound of my world quietly falling apart. Growing up, I always believed my parents had the perfect marriage. My mom was warm, caring, and the kind of person who made every room feel safe. My dad was steady and dependable, the kind of man who showed his love through quiet gestures, a packed lunch, a fixed light bulb, a steady paycheck. We weren't rich, but we were stable. At least, that's what I thought. Looking back now, I realize I missed the signs. The late-night arguments behind closed doors. The way my mom would stare blankly at her phone. The silences at dinner that grew longer over time. I was 17 when everything changed. It was a stormy Thursday night. I had a headache from cramming for exams and decided to head downstairs for some water. The house was dark and quiet, except for the faint sound of voices coming from the living room. I didn't think much of it, maybe Mom was watching TV, or maybe she couldn't sleep. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't the TV. It was her voice, soft, laughing in a way I hadn't heard in years. And then, there was a man's voice, low, familiar, but not my father's. I froze. My heart was racing, but my feet stayed planted. I couldn't move. I didn't want to believe what I was hearing, but I couldn't deny it either. I took a slow step forward and peeked around the corner, and what I saw in that moment burned itself into my memory forever. I'll never forget the way my mother looked at him, not like a stranger, not like a friend, but like someone she had been waiting for. That single moment shattered everything I thought I knew. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But I just stood there, feeling like the walls were closing in on me. It wasn't just about betrayal, it was the realization that people, even the ones closest to you, can have whole secret lives hiding just beneath the surface. And from that night on, nothing ever felt the same. I never told my dad. I never confronted her. But the memory? It never left. It's the reason I still wake up at night in a cold sweat. It's the reason I find it hard to trust anyone. And it's the reason I decided to finally share this story, even if it still hurts to say it out loud. Because maybe, just maybe, someone out there needs to hear it. But what happened after that night, that's a whole other part of the story. After that night, something in me shifted. I went back up to my room and just stared at the ceiling for hours, trying to convince myself it didn't happen. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe it wasn't what it looked like. But deep down, I knew exactly what I saw. And once you see something like that, you can't unsee it. My mom didn't notice me. She never even knew I was there. But I saw enough to know that it wasn't just some random mistake. It was something deeper, something that had probably been going on for a while. In the days that followed, I started paying more attention. To everything. The way she smiled at her phone when no one was looking. The sudden grocery runs that took longer than they should. The way my dad never asked questions, never seemed suspicious. Maybe he trusted her too much. Or maybe he was just too tired to see what was right in front of him. Either way, it became clear that I was the only one who knew what was really happening. And carrying that secret felt heavier than I ever imagined. I kept trying to act normal. Pretend everything was okay. But I started pulling away, from school, from friends, from family dinners. I became quiet, distant. My mom noticed, of course. She'd ask if I was okay, if something was bothering me. And every time, I wanted to scream and ask her how she could lie to us all like that. But I didn't. I just nodded and said I was fine, while everything inside me kept breaking. I started remembering little things from the past that now made more sense. Like the late phone calls she always said were from work. Or the way she'd suddenly get dressed up and say she was meeting an old friend. Back then, I didn't question it. I trusted her. She was my mom. She wasn't supposed to be capable of betrayal. But now, every memory felt like a piece of a puzzle I didn't know I was putting together. And the picture it created wasn't pretty. The man I saw that night. I still didn't know who he was. But something about his voice felt familiar, like I'd heard it before, maybe in passing. I couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't a stranger. And the more I thought about it, the more I started to wonder, was this just about an affair, or was there something else? Something even more complicated? I had no proof. No answers. Just the weight of what I saw and the ache of not knowing what to do with it. And as days turned into weeks, that silence grew louder. I started skipping meals just to avoid sitting at the same table with her. Every time I looked at my mom, I saw that moment again, her soft laugh, the way she leaned in, how comfortable she looked with him. I didn't know how she could walk around the house like nothing had happened. Like she wasn't hiding something so huge, so damaging. Maybe that was the scariest part, how easy it was for her to pretend. It made me question everything. How long had she been living this double life? And why didn't I see it sooner? At school, I was distracted all the time. I stopped turning in assignments. Teachers noticed, friends asked what was wrong, but I kept brushing it off. I couldn't talk about it with anyone. Who would even believe me? And even if they did, what could they say that would make it hurt less? I kept thinking about my dad, how he worked late, always came home tired, how he still kissed her on the cheek like he truly believed she was his person. And yet, she was seeing someone else behind his back. The guilt of knowing and saying nothing was slowly destroying me. One day, I saw the man again, outside a local coffee shop. He was getting into a car, casually sipping from a paper cup. For a second, I froze. Then I realized something that made my stomach turn. He was a family friend. Someone who used to come over during holidays. Not often, but enough that his face was buried somewhere in my memories. My dad even once called him, like a brother. That detail made everything worse. It wasn't just betrayal, it was betrayal tangled in years of trust and family connection. That night, my mom came into my room. She said she missed talking to me. Said I seemed distant. She sat on the edge of my bed like she used to when I was a kid. For a moment, I wanted to believe it was all a bad dream. But I couldn't shake what I knew. I looked at her and asked how long she'd known Paul, that was his name. Her face went pale. She stammered something about him being an old friend. Nothing more. But I saw the fear flash across her eyes. That's when I knew. I wasn't imagining things. She was hiding something. And now that I had a name, I needed to know the truth, even if it meant uncovering more than I was ready for. After that night, something shifted between me and my mom. She could sense I knew more than I was letting on, and I could feel her pulling away too, more cautious, more careful with her words. The house felt colder, like the silence between us had its own weight. My dad still carried on, completely unaware, laughing at the news in the evenings and asking if anyone wanted ice cream. Watching him was like watching someone walking blindfolded toward a cliff. And I was just standing there, frozen, unable to scream. I started digging. Quietly. I found old text logs on the home computer, messages that had been deleted but not wiped completely. I didn't want to read them, I really didn't. But I needed to. I needed to confirm what I had seen. What I read broke something in me. There were months of conversations, some flirty, some deeply emotional. They weren't just sneaking around, they had a history. They had feelings. And worse, they had plans. There were mentions of, someday, of, when things change. My chest tightened as I read that part over and over. Was she planning to leave? To start a new life with him? The more I found, the angrier I became. But the fear never left. What if I confronted her and she denied it? What if I told my dad and shattered him? Or worse, what if he already knew and was just pretending not to? The thought twisted my stomach. I needed to talk to someone, but I still couldn't bring myself to share this with a friend or a teacher. It felt too personal, too raw. I didn't want pity, I wanted answers. One evening, I followed her. She said she was going to pick up groceries. I waited a few minutes, then grabbed my bike and pedaled after her. My heart was racing the whole way. It felt wrong, like I was invading someone's privacy. But then again, hadn't she done that first? She didn't go to the grocery store. She parked a few blocks away and got into someone else's car. His car. Paul's car. I stayed hidden behind a dumpster, watching from a distance. They didn't talk long, but they didn't need to. The way she looked at him said everything. I gripped the handles of my bike so tightly my hands went numb. And that's when I made the decision, I was going to confront her. No more hiding. No more pretending. I was done being a silent witness. But I had no idea what would happen once I did. I didn't sleep that night. My mind was racing, playing out every possible version of how the confrontation could go. I imagined her denying everything, crying, apologizing, or maybe getting angry and turning it all around on me. I had no idea what to expect. All I knew was that I couldn't keep this inside any longer. It was eating me alive. I just wanted the truth. I wanted to understand how a mother, the woman I trusted most, could do something like this to our family. The next morning, I waited for the right moment. My dad had already left for work. My mom was in the kitchen, casually making coffee like nothing had happened. I sat down at the table, trying to keep my voice steady, and simply said, "I know everything." Her hand paused mid-stir. She didn't look at me right away, but I could see her whole body tense. For a second, I thought she might collapse right there. She finally looked up and whispered, "How long have you known?" I told her. About the night I saw her. About the messages. About Paul. And I braced myself for the storm. But the look in her eyes wasn't fear, it was something else. Something that made my stomach drop. She looked almost relieved. Like the weight of hiding it had become too much for her too. And then came the twist I never saw coming. She reached for my hand and said, "I didn't mean for you to find out this way. But I also didn't think I could keep lying to you much longer. There's something you don't know about your father." I pulled my hand back. "What are you talking about?" She hesitated, then said, "Your dad, he hasn't been the man you think he is. Paul wasn't just someone I turned to for comfort. He was someone I turned to because I couldn't take it anymore. Your father, he's been hiding things too." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My dad? The same man who came home every night, fixed the leaky sink, watched basketball with me. What could he possibly be hiding? She didn't go into details. She just said, "There are things I can't explain right now. But you deserve to know the full story. And so does he." Now I wasn't just caught between a lie and a betrayal, I was trapped in something much deeper, something darker. Suddenly, this wasn't just about my mom cheating. It was about a family that had been quietly falling apart long before I ever noticed. The stakes had completely changed. I didn't know who to believe anymore. I didn't know who to trust. All I knew was that everything I thought I understood about my parents, my home, my life, it was all unraveling faster than I could process. And the worst part was, the real story hadn't even begun to unfold yet. I finally convinced my mom to tell me everything. We sat down in the living room, the same place where I had seen her with Paul, and she opened up in a way I'd never seen before. Her voice trembled at first, but she didn't hold back. She told me that for the last 2 years, things with my dad had been falling apart behind closed doors. It wasn't about arguing or yelling, it was about distance. He stopped caring. Stopped showing up emotionally. She tried talking to him, but he always brushed it off, saying everything was fine. Until one day, she found out he had been gambling. Secretly. Quietly. For years. He had drained their joint savings. Even borrowed money from people she didn't know. She only found out when a man showed up at the house asking for repayment. That's when she turned to Paul, not for romance, at first, but for help. Paul had once been close to both of them, and she trusted him. But over time, the closeness grew into something more. Something complicated. And wrong. She knew that. But by then, she felt trapped between two broken paths, living in silence with my dad, or clinging to something that at least felt like care. I didn't know how to react. My world was spinning. My father, who I always saw as the steady one, had hidden something so big. And my mom, who I thought was just the one who betrayed, was actually carrying her own kind of pain. None of it made what she did okay, but it wasn't so black and white anymore. That night, we agreed to sit down with my dad. I didn't want to, but I had to. We needed everything out in the open. The conversation was brutal. My dad was silent for most of it. At first, he denied the gambling, then finally admitted it with his head down. When my mom confessed about Paul, he didn't yell. He just sat there, blinking slowly, like he was hearing something he had always suspected but never wanted to confirm. For the first time, I saw both my parents completely unguarded, stripped of all the masks they'd worn for so long. But just when I thought that was the end of it, when I thought everything had finally surfaced, my dad looked at me and said, "You think you know everything. But Paul isn't just a friend. He's your mother's old flame from before we even got married. I found out about them years ago. And I stayed, because I thought I could protect you from all this." That one sentence hit harder than anything else. This wasn't a new betrayal, it was a cycle. One that had started long before I was even born. Everything made sense in a twisted way. My parents were never truly whole. They just built a fragile life and tried to hold it together for me. Now, I had to decide what to do with the truth. Because sometimes, the hardest part isn't finding out what happened, it's figuring out what comes next. The days that followed felt like walking through the wreckage of a storm. Everything was quiet, too quiet. My parents weren't talking much to each other, and I spent most of my time in my room, trying to make sense of everything. We had all finally spoken our truths, but the air between us was still heavy. There were no more secrets, but also no clear answers on how to move forward. And honestly, I wasn't sure if we even could. My mom moved out for a while, not out of anger, but to give everyone space. She stayed with a relative across town. My dad didn't fight it. He seemed tired. Maybe he'd been carrying the weight of the past for too long. I saw a different version of him in those weeks. Not the strong, steady father I'd grown up with, but a man who had been holding on to pain in silence. He started going to therapy, and eventually, he asked if I'd like to come with him. It was awkward at first, but slowly, we started to understand each other better, not just as father and son, but as two people who had both been stuck in the middle of a family built on silence. As for my mom, she admitted that what she did was wrong, no matter the reasons. She apologized, not just for the betrayal, but for the confusion and hurt I had to carry because of it. I could tell it came from a real place. She didn't make excuses. She owned it. And somehow, that made it easier for me to let go of some of the anger. Paul never showed up again. I think they both knew it wasn't a future worth chasing. Maybe it was just an escape from a broken present. Whatever it was, it ended the same way it began, quietly and without much closure. In the months that followed, life slowly started to find a rhythm again. My parents didn't get back together, but they learned how to talk without bitterness. We had dinners, even laughed sometimes. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. That mattered more to me than pretending everything was fine. I finally understood that families aren't always clean and whole. Sometimes they're messy, bruised, and full of history we can't erase. But healing doesn't always mean fixing, it can mean accepting what is, and learning to live honestly in it. That night with my mother still plays in my head every day, not because I'm stuck in the past, but because it changed me. It forced me to see the people I loved for who they really were, flaws and all. And strangely, that made me stronger. I learned that trust, once broken, can sometimes be rebuilt, not through words, but through time, through actions, through honesty. If you're watching this and you've ever felt like your world turned upside down, just know you're not alone. Sometimes the truth hurts, but it also frees you. And in that freedom, even after betrayal, there's a chance to start again. 54.